welcome to the channel. We are in a festive mood here, as you can tell with all the Christmas stuff, because it's almost Christmas time, and Congress has given us a Christmas surprise a little bit early. We're going to get into that in a second, but they did, well, some of them did.
Oh, you mean they're shutting the ATF down early?
I would love that, but no. We're going to be talking about an Amicus brief that was just filed. And we are back live. Thank you, Rich, for joining us here. And we are going to be talking about a case that's in front of the Supreme Court. And there is a... Let me just do something really fast. Okay, there you go. Okay, and in this case, it deals with it's called a Gardner versus Maryland. We talked about it with our friend Steven Stimbolia at 2A Law on YouTube just not too long ago. And what happened was a lady driving, and she accidentally crossed into Maryland from Virginia with her firearm. She did not have a Maryland concealed carry permit, and that could be an issue. What happened was somebody assaulted her in her car. She pulled out a gun to defend herself. Instead of focusing on the actual criminal, what they did was arrested her for having a gun in Maryland without a Maryland concealed carry permit. Maryland...
Second Amendment right what?
Yeah. Maryland does not recognize Virginia's CHP, concealed handgun permit. Maryland does not recognize anyone. So you have to get a specific Maryland permit. So they arrested her for defending herself with her firearm. This is going up in front of the Supreme Court. She is the appellant in this case, and she's seeking a writ of certiorari with the Supreme Court versus Maryland. The case is Gardner versus Maryland. Eva Marie Gardner is the appellant, and this could have rippling effects across the whole entire 2A landscape. Not necessarily, but it could. It could have rippling effects across 2A landscape, the 2A landscape, because what they could do is go ahead and rule on this for her and say that is not as applied, or they can do a facial challenge. It's what the Supreme Court says. We're not going to get into that right now because the Supreme Court hasn't even taken the case. But as of today, a bunch of U.S. senators, Ted Cruz, Ted Budd, John Cornyn, who is famous for the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, maybe he's trying to save his bacon, Steve Daines, Lindsey Graham, Jim Justice, James Lankford, Mike Lee, Cynthia Loomis, Ashley Moody of Florida, Rand Paul, Tom Tillis, and Tom Tillis, they basically issued an amicus brief. We're gonna read a little bit through it right now, and then we're going to get out of here and enjoy our weekend. But so let's go ahead and start right here. Rich, you see it?
Amici will address the first question presented in the petition. Does Maryland's prohibition on carrying a handgun without a state permit as... And it's not centered. I can't read it.
I'm trying to get it centered. Never mind. There you go.
Put us on the bottom. Let's see.
We'll do that. That's a good idea.
Does Maryland's prohibition on carrying a handgun without a state permit as applied to an interstate traveler with a valid Virginia concealed carry permit who displayed a loaded firearm in self-defense against an assailant's vehicular assault and physical advance violate the Second Amendment under the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin. Yay,
She
Judge
ran
Thomas.
off the road, and they were approaching her with a handgun. They were approaching her, so she drew her handgun.
Yeah, that's
This
really,
is like the table of content.
That's exactly what Bruin and the Second Amendment say. We got to change our layout because this is not working good. Which layout do we be? No, that is the layout we should use. All right, let's select. Okay, over the past 2 decades, this court has restored and reaffirmed the Second Amendment's core guarantee that ordinary law-abiding Americans have a fundamental right to defend themselves first in the home in Heller, then against the state infringement in McDonald, and finally in public in Bruin. This case presents... I don't know where you skipped to.
This case prevents...
I lost my...
okay, in Bruin. It would reaffirm that the right of self-defense does not evaporate at a state border, but remains the birthright of every American citizen.
Oh, okay, there you are. Sorry, this case presents an enormously important Second Amendment question about the self-defense rights interstate travelers, one that has been given short shrift by federal and state courts. The right to self-defense means little if it ends in a short distance. Amen, brother. From your door and a patchwork of state licensing schemes is an onerous burden on Americans who must travel for work or pleasure and want to defend themselves. The United States has a long history of exempting interstate travelers from gun control laws, and Maryland Appellate Court failed to recognize this tradition or even conduct a Bruin analysis. Or even conduct a Bruin analysis. I want to make sure I say that right. Amicus are Senator Ted Cruz of Texas.
We know already said who they are, so.
Okay. In the underlying case, the petitioner Ava Marie Gardner was traveling from her home in Virginia to her mother's home in Pennsylvania when her vehicle was struck twice and forced from the road in Maryland. When both vehicles came to a stop, the other driver approached her vehicle. Gardner holds a concealed carry permit and carried a loaded gun in her glove box. Fearing for her safety, she showed the approaching driver her gun and told him to return to his car. He did so. Following a jury trial, Gardner was convicted of carrying a loaded handgun on or about her person and knowingly transporting a loaded handgun in her vehicle in violation of Maryland criminal law. Blah. On appeal, Maryland Appellate Court recognized that the Second Amendment and 14th Amendments protect an individual's right to carry a handgun for self-defense outside the home, but declined to conduct a Bruin analysis for Maryland criminal law, relying on a footnote in Bruin to decide that shall issue permitting schemes are per se constitutional. And I hate you for that.
Yeah, that is footnote 9.
And permitting are constitutional, and the court ignored the end of the footnote that recognized the potential for an as-applied challenges to such permitting schemes. The court then decided that reciprocity is not mandated under Bruin, and that unless and until the Supreme Court of the United States holds otherwise, or unless the Congress enacts a statute requiring nationwide reciprocity, we hold that Maryland was entitled to require the resident of another state to possess a Maryland handgun permit to legally transport a loaded handgun on the public roads of Maryland for reasons explained in the petition here, and the court should correct this failure to follow Bruin and ignore the self-defense rights of interstate travelers. Additional reasons for granting the petition. The Second Amendment provides an unqualified command that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This court has recognized that this unqualified right to self-defense applies inside the home, District of Columbia versus Heller, McDonald v. City of Chicago, and outside the home in Bruin. This court should now recognize that the right applies not merely near the home, but as the person travels. Amici write separately to provide this court with extensive evidence of the United States historical tradition of exempting travelers from firearms regulation, such as Maryland concealed carry statute at issue here. This court should grant review to disapprove the lower court's failure to apply Bruin. The Maryland Appellate Court's decision continues the troubling pattern of state and federal courts ignoring the Bruin framework. This court has been clear that the very enumeration of the Second Amendment takes out of the hands of government the power to decide on a case-by-case basis whether the right to keep and bear arms is really worth insisting upon. And they're quoting Bruin. The Second Amendment, I just lost myself. Bruin. The Second Amendment is the very product of an interest balancing by the people, and it surely elevates all of the above interests, the right to bear of law-abiding, responsible citizens to use arms for self-defense. This balance, struck by the traditions of the American people, demands unqualified deference. Instead of giving deference to the American people's constitutional determination, the court below avoided conducting a Bruin analysis. Had it done so, it would have held that Maryland criminal law, blah, as applied to Gardner's circumstances, is unconstitutional. This court should grant review to clarify that it really meant what Bruin said, or what it said in Bruin. This nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation does not include broad department, especially of interstate travelers. The Maryland Appellate Court failed to conduct a Bruin analysis. In Bruin, the court instructed the state and federal courts to use a two-step framework when evaluating Second Amendment claims. First, the court determines whether the Second Amendment plain text covers the conduct. If so, the Constitution presumptively protects that conduct. The burden then shifts to the government, who must affirmatively prove that its firearm regulation is consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation that delimits the outer bounds of the right to keep and bear arms.
Yeah, I just want to say that basically the court said, we're not going to do that. We're just going to rely on footnote 9.
Because that would make us wrong.
That says like licensing schemes are presumptively constitutional, which I disagree with, but that is what
I disagree with also
says.
Because the Second Amendment is very clear. You have the right to keep and bear arms, and it shall not be infringed.
Yeah, but one of the things that they can say is that, okay, even if you don't get rid of footnote 9, she was licensed to carry a concealed handgun. The question is whether that license ends at the state border, or if it's like driver's license and all states.
Marriage license.
Yep.
The court looks for a well-established and representative historical analog, not a historical twin, but courts should not uphold every modern law that remotely resembles a historical analog, because doing so risks endorsing outliers that our ancestors would have never accepted. An analogous statute is one that follows the same how and why the regulations burden a law-abiding citizen's right to armed self-defense. Instead of conducting a Bruin analysis and placing the burden of proof on the government to show the historical analog that could justify its regulation, the Maryland Appellate Court treated a statement on shall issue permitting schemes in footnote 9 of Bruin as dispositive. In Bruin, this court wrote that nothing in our analysis should be interpreted to suggest the unconstitutionality of the 43 states shall issue licensing regimes under which a general desire for self-defense is sufficient to obtain a permit. Bruin, let's see. But nothing in the dicta found in that footnote purports to exempt permitting schemes from Bruin analysis. In fact, the footnote says that because any permitting scheme can be put toward abusive ends, this court does not rule out constitutional challenges to shall issue regimes. Had the court below conducted a Bruin analysis, it would have been forced to admit that no historical analog exists for depriving interstate drivers of their self-defense right. Failure to conduct an individualized determination of the right to keep and bear arms is not in keeping with America's historical traditions. Under the first step of the Bruin analysis, no one has disputed that Gardner, an ordinary law-abiding adult citizen, is part of the people whom the Second Amendment protects. Bruin, quoting Heller, nor does any party dispute the fact that handguns are in common use for self-defense. Heller, quoting Blah, and the court should have little difficulty concluding that Gardner's proposed course of conduct involving carrying handguns publicly for self-defense is protected by the plain text of the Second Amendment. As this court has held, nothing in the Second Amendment's text draws a home-public distinction with respect to the right to keep and bear arms, and nothing the Second Amendment's text draws a distinction between keeping and bearing arms in public outside your home, at the supermarket, or in Gardner's case, on the way from home to visiting your mother in another state. Under the second step of the Bruin analysis, the government, not Gardner, bears the burden of showing a historical analog. The Maryland Appellate Court erred in not requiring the government to meet that burden, but in any event, no historical analog exists here, and when a challenged regulation addresses a general societal problem that has persisted since the 18th century, the lack of a distinctly similar historical regulation addressing that problem is relevant evidence that the challenged regulation is inconsistent with the Second Amendment.
Yeah, if they used a Bruin analysis, since no analog exists, they would have lost on the Bruin analysis, and she should have won. So that's why they're saying that the court avoided using a Bruin analysis.
From the earliest modern Anglo-American history, the right to keep and bear arms in public has traditionally been subject to well-defined restrictions governing the intent for which one would carry arms, the manner of carry, or the exceptional circumstances under which one could not carry arms. Early common law prohibited the act of going off armed to terrify the king's subjects, which always involved evil intent or malice, and blah. This common law,
they're saying that it's more of intent than the action.
This common law crime was affirmed in the Statute of Northampton.
Yeah, they always reference that. We've talked about Northampton before.
Later, some earlier colonial statutes similarly authorized justices of the peace to arrest all affrayers, rioters, disturbers, breakers of the peace, and such as shall ride or go armed offensively by night or by day in fear of affray of their majesties.
Basically, it's another example of how they said that, arming, but
so the king was able to pull you off the street if you're armed.
No, if you're armed with ill intent.
An early unique colonial statute prohibited planters from carrying all pistols unless in military service. In colonial times, a planter was simply a farmer or a plantation owner who settled in a new territory, but the statute exempted all strangers from traveling upon their lawful occasions through the province, behaving themselves peaceably. Going armed statutes endured in the late 18th century and early 19th century that prohibited bearing arms in a way that spreads fear or terror among the people, and not merely for carrying the firearm in public.
Brandishing. You can
right
down here.
Following ratification, states continued recognizing the common law prohibition on bearing arms to terrorize the public. Bruin State statutory prohibitions showed a consensus that states could not ban public carry altogether. At a time, it was considered beyond the constitutional pale to altogether prohibit carry. The consensus view at the time was that states could not altogether prohibit the public carry of arms protected by the Second Amendment or state analogs. The final type of relevant post-ratification statutes were surety states that require certain individuals to post bond before carrying weapons in public. These statutes presumed that individuals had a right to carry and that could be burdened only if another could make out a specific showing of reasonable cause to fear an injury or breach of the peace, and surety laws did not prohibit public carry in locations frequented by the general community. Rather, an accused arms bearer could go on carrying without criminal penalty as long as he posted money that would be forfeited if he breached the peace or injured others.
So
And
that
even
just going through examples of where it's not happened, then it goes into the 14th Amendment, which applied the Bill of Rights and the Constitution to the states. But let's just jump down to here. In some. I'll do it. In some, the history of public carry in America shows that the Second Amendment is guaranteed to all Americans the right to keep and bear arms, commonly use arms in public, subject to certain reasonable, well-defined restrictions. Those restrictions, for example, limited the intent of which one was carrying, blah, blah, blah. Okay, basically that's just quoting Bruin there. And then we jump down to where they talk about interstate travel, self-defense rights. Just as the right to bear arms is not limited to the home, so is it not limited to one state of residence. The right to keep and bear arms for self-defense means relatively little if it ends at a state border, especially for people who live near borders, like me, for example, and are required to cross state lines for work or daily living, such as those living in the Virginia, Maryland, D.C. area, like me. In fact, states have a long recognized as heightened interest in self-defense for travelers and have accordingly exempted them from gun control laws. Yet today, some states have refused to recognize self-defense rights of interstate travelers, resulting in a patchwork of permitting schemes, creates an impractical burden requiring a person to obtain a permit from each state which she travels. Then it goes back into Scottish law a little bit. Then it shows how like travelers were exempted from it. So it gives us some examples of travelers being exempted from the gun control, like from Indiana. Their gun control says every person not being a traveler. So it's a bunch of different laws that showed that travelers were exempted from local gun laws. It's a bunch. And this is the big one. There's only 2 pages left. So Rich, I'm going to kick it back over to you.
Sure. As a practical matter, there is no reason that reciprocity for concealed carry licenses is not feasible. It has been implemented for much more dangerous licenses than concealed carry permits. Reciprocity exists for driver's licenses, even though there is no constitutional right to drive cars, and cars are much more dangerous than firearms. No other constitutional right requires a license, and the constitutional right to bear arms in public for self-defense is not a second-class right, subject to an entirely different body of rules than the Bill of Rights guarantees. This court has stated that it knows of no other constitutional right that an individual may exercise only after demonstrating to government officers some special need. Such would be unimaginable for other enumerated rights That is not how the First Amendment works when it comes to unpopular speech or the free exercise of religion. It is not how the Sixth Amendment works when it comes to a defendant's right to confront the witness against him. Requiring a license to exercise the freedom of speech or to practice one's religion would be abhorrent. Accordingly, restrictive licenses should not be how the Second Amendment works when it comes to public carry for self-defense. If states perceive an actual problem with an armed stranger traveling through their borders and their regulations are not merely pretextual, they should solve the problem by looking to regulations in keeping with American history. They should retain the benefit of concealed carry for their residents while requiring travelers to open carry. They could condition exemptions on a traveler spending no more than a certain amount of time in the state, but what states cannot do is prohibit open carry and restrict concealed carry to state license holders while they're rejecting reciprocity. The self-defense rights of the peoples cannot be thus infringed. The people have the right to self-defense, and that right is not limited to the home or the vicinity of the home. The United States has long recognized the need to exempt travelers from gun control laws. The need for an exemption could not be clearer than for permitting schemes like Maryland's that are outside the American historical tradition. This court should reaffirm the analysis it's required in Bruin and restore the right of the people to self-defense and interstate travel. Respectfully submitted.
This is a big deal. I'm not too much of a big fan of this amicus brief. I think it went kind of soft. But let's go ahead and let's talk about one of the things I want to talk about on this is basically what they were saying, right? About Maryland's scheme. This could be pretty big because they could rule that states have to recognize each other's permits. The Supreme Court could say that if they decide to grant a writ certiorari in this case, which they haven't granted a writ certiorari, but by Congress, people in Congress writing amicus briefs, that strengthens the chance of the Supreme Court taking it. Well, another option, if they don't grant cert, and if they don't take it and hear it, what could do is they could GVR the case too. GVR stands for grant, vacate, and remand. So what they could do, and I think might be the most likely situation here is I think what they could do is GVR the case and say, hey, you guys should have used Bruin analysis on this. You did not. So what we're going to do is we are going to grant cert. We're going to vacate your decision and we're going to remand it back down to you. And we're going to order you to go ahead and go ahead. You know what? I know what the hell's going on here. But we're going to go ahead and make you do a Bruin analysis on this. And then after that, then it can come back up to the Supreme Court. I think that's probably the most likely situation that we have here. But we'll see exactly what happens here. I think the most likely case that this is going to get GVR'd and sent back down because they should have done a Bruin analysis. Them claiming that they didn't do a Bruin analysis because constitutional, like child issue permitting schemes are presumptively constitutional is BS. Because even in footnote 9, where the circuit court referenced, it says that not all permitting schemes, even if they're child issue, is inherently constitutional. They're not necessarily constitutional, even though that they could be constitutional. So they should have used a Bruin analysis to go ahead and and look at this at Maryland's law itself, which they did not do. And the reason why I don't think that they did that is because if they did use a Bruin analysis on it, I don't think that they would have been able to get this through.
It was intentional. They intentionally ignored that.
Yeah, I do agree. I do think that they intentionally ignored Bruin and said we don't need to do a Bruin analysis because it will fail. Because there is zero historical analogs to point to the Maryland scheme being constitutional. Now you got to remember, and Rahimi, they said it doesn't have to be a historical twin, but it has to be similar, and there is none that's similar. So there we go.
I think they're similarly full of crap.
Yeah, but with the Bruin analysis, I don't see how the. But then again, it's the Fourth Circuit, and the Fourth Circuit is the most anti-gun circuit in the country, even a lot more anti-gun than the Ninth Circuit. So I'm sure that they would still rule for Maryland, but it would just strengthen the case when it got back up to SCOTUS, and they would. That's what I'm saying. I think that is something that really needs to be looked into, and I hope they do grant cert in this case because she ran off the road, and the guy approached her to do ill will. Oh, a guy approaching you, running you. If the guy runs me off the road and starts approaching my car, I'm pulling my gun.
Yep.
I don't know exactly. He got a gun. I don't know what he's going to do, and I'm not taking that chance. I'm going home.
Right.
He might, but I'm going home. And what is she going to do? Get out and fight someone? Whatever. So I'm definitely going home. So it was definitely self-defense, and for them to even prosecute her on this, that shows you how twisted Maryland is when they prosecute a woman defending themselves after being run off the road by a man, and the man's approaching her car, and yet they're going to go after her. It doesn't make any sense. It's wrong. It's stupid, and it just shows a fundamental hatred for self-defense that the people in Maryland have. She should have never been arrested. She should have never been charged, and it's just dumb and stupid. It I live close to Maryland, right? And I did a video a couple of years back where I stood at the feet of the Potomac. The Potomac is owned by Maryland, so there's some weird law that says you're allowed to have a gun even though it's Maryland because there's some like water law or something. I don't know, but if I cross that river, I would have been guilty of a felony. So I went from law abiding to guilty of a felony just by crossing that river. This is before I had my Maryland concealed carry permit. So, and that's really stupid. My county is on the border of Maryland. So if I step out of my county over to Maryland, then I'll be guilty of a felony in the eyes of the courts in Maryland, which is dumb as shit. Dumb as shit. But yeah. That's all I have to say about that. Hopefully the Supreme Court takes this because she should not be prosecuted. She should be cleared. And
it's funny. I just messaged Mama Hoffman something.
Yeah, she's in the chat. All right. Anything you want to say about this before we get out of here?
Look, I think my driver's license, pilot's license, marriage license is recognized throughout the state. In fact, my pilot's license is recognized throughout the world. I don't understand. And there are, so what wasn't mentioned here, and if it was, I missed it, is Florida has preemption, meaning every county in Florida and every municipality cannot have their own firearm regulations. But some states are that way, that you would have to know every town and county's laws to travel through it legally.
Yeah, I know the majority of different laws in like counties and stuff like that, but I don't know them all. And this is what I do. I mean, this is my whole entire thing. This is what I do. And not everyone has a like have the time, or this is what your job is, to go and learn about all this stuff, right?
And even reciprocity changes. So
Reciprocity changes all the time. It can change tomorrow.
you could start a trip. And I remember my Florida reciprocity with Pennsylvania changed for a period of time. Originally there was, and apparently, the Florida had a beef or Pennsylvania had a beef with Florida, and they stopped reciprocity. So
Yeah,
you
this
could
takes
literally start a 1 week trip to New York and back, or let's say Pennsylvania and back, where you can carry, and have the reciprocity laws change while you're in travel.
yeah, exactly. It's like the AG of Florida can come out tomorrow and go, we're not going to recognize Georgia, and Georgia's can be like, we don't recognize
Yes.
Florida anymore.
And
you're like,
basically
oh,
that's what happened. I don't remember the specific details. And I mean, could you imagine if religion was that way, which was a good example that they brought up in the Amicus brief, is, like, hey, I want to pray, or I'm a Floridian, but I want to pray in Maryland, and I get caught praying in a Maryland church. Does that mean I get arrested and sent to jail?
yeah, the Second Amendment is not a second class right, and there shouldn't be special requirements for the Second Amendment. But
And I like the contrast. The Bill of Rights were there for a reason. The first 10 amendments specify the rights of the individual and the protections granted to them.
The Bill of Rights, it acknowledges these, and it's a bill. What do I always call the Bill of Rights?
Oh, yeah.
Bill of Negative Liberties, because
Yes, it's a charter of negative liberties, and it says what they can't do to you.
Yeah, because like the government cannot violate these rights. We acknowledge these rights, but these rights are inalienable, right? They're from your creator, whether you want to believe that's God, the universe, I don't know, like a worm on the ground, whatever you want to believe. They are from your creator. They are inalienable. The government cannot take those rights from you. Those are your rights. Now you can say like, well, like, oh, what do the government cannot just willy-nilly wake up one day and be like, yeah, you don't have your Second Amendment right, whatever. Yeah, if you believe in this flying spaghetti monster, there you go. Those rights are inalienable. Those are not from the government. Your rights do not come from the government. And that's what a lot of people get confused about. They think the rights are from the government and the Constitution grants you rights. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights specifically, does not grant you a damn right. It acknowledges the rights you already have. Sorry, I got a little bit heated there.
Alrighty, Crumpy, I got errands to run.
Right, yep. Not man given or regulated, exactly. All right, guys, that's it. I hope you guys have fun. Enjoy your weekend. I got a lot of work to get done. I got a story to tell you guys, and this is, you'll hear about it in a week, but it was something that it started out small, but got real big, real fucking fast. But we'll get into that later, like probably this time next week. All right, guys. Stay free, and I'll see you.